Today we're going to be making some pure black dice for your emo and goth soul. So don't fall out, boy, we'll get the cure for your chemical romance. Just give me about 3 days grace before you comment on these dice so that you don't go panicking at my disco. Anywho, here's some really dark dice. So if you haven't seen any of my videos on how to make your own dice molds, I highly recommend checking those out because this video is not about how to make your own dice and dice molds, more about how to use a specific pigment with creating DIY dice to create a very specific style of dice. So we're going to be using Resin Obsession resin this time because I think it fits well with the pigment that we're using. Make sure that you check out the safety data sheet down below and always wear protective gear like these nitrile gloves and a respirator when you're working with resin. So the reason I want to use this resin over my normal Art and Glow type resin is because all of the mix-ins with it are literally thick pigments. They are meant to be mixed in with something like this, which is what we're going to be using with the pigment moving forward in this video. So I thought that this would fit better than the Art and Glow. Though after having finished this, I am sure that you would get almost identical results using pretty much any type of casting resin. So don't feel like you have to use this type of resin for this specific set of dice. Now that we've got our molds ready and our resin mixed up for a good 5 minutes, we can move on to the pigment that we're going to use. This pigment is sold by Culture Hustle and it's made by Stuart Semple, I want to say his name is. I honestly can't read the handwriting, but it's sold as the mattest black pigment that you can possibly get. They actually sell paints now that are an improved version, but this is the only pigment form that they sell, and they don't even really sell it anymore. I was lucky to get my hands on it. It has some weird properties here, like you can see when I'm pouring it in, some of it just wants to immediately stick to the sides. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's just so small it's clinging to any static electricity that it can possibly find on the sides of this plastic container, but whatever, we'll go for it. I poured a bunch in and I thought, no, I'm not doing enough justice here with this black, and I poured way more in there. Honestly, probably too much. It clumps up a bit, but it doesn't seem to affect the final dice casting, so I'm happy with it. It makes my really dark goth soul really happy looking at this essential void of blackness within this resin. It is crazy dark. I'm going to use one of these little pour spouts that are used for baking, the same thing that I've done in a few other videos to fill up my dice. So I pour this out and fill it up. I highly recommend using a pipette over this method. This is just what I have on hand. It still is pretty easy to fill these things up, though sometimes it kind of spills and runs over and you have to wipe some things up because the nozzle's a little bit too big, but whatever, we'll deal with it for now. I put all of the dice molds inside of my pressure pot on the bottom. I don't need the multi-layer one for this one. I'm only doing one set. I connect my air compressor and fill the pressure pot up to about 40 psi, which I think is ideal for getting some glass looking dice. Now I'm going to show you another mold making method using the silicone mold putty, which I learned from Crafsman. I'm essentially a Crafsman copy channel at this point, but it's going to detail some things with the pigment that I normally wouldn't be able to show. So I'm using this little wax sealer, which has an A on it, standing for Adventurers Guild, which is something I'm doing in my coming campaign, to create a mold with this silicone putty. Now we want to use this mold to show off what the pigment does. I like to use these gloves whenever I do it so that I don't get anything on my hands, but I honestly don't think that there's anything wrong with using your hands. This just has a lot of oil on it and it makes your hands feel really weird. So you take 2 equal parts of this and you mix them up. You kind of rub them together for a good 5 minutes, and then you've got a mold that will set in 30 minutes. It is not as good a quality as pouring your own silicone mold. This is for some trinkets that honestly having a few voids and stuff really doesn't bother you. So in this case, it's great to test out a new method, which is what we're doing with the pigments. So I wanted to show you 2 different ways that you could go about making molds. But I also kind of want to show you the dangers of going about it this way with the pigment instead of mixing it directly with the resin. I push my little A wax sealer down on it to indent the A inside the silicone mold, which will give me a small little A section. I'm trying to make a coin out of this. The coin is going to be used in the campaign as a identifier for being in the Adventurers Guild, so this gets me what I want. I've got a completed mold here after 30 minutes. Now I wanted to make another one because I already had 2 molds made for this, one that's going to be a coin and one that's a pendant, but you can see using some gold mica powder in there, it makes an awesome gold coin. but it leaves a ton of that gold mica powder pigment left in the mold, which is really the main reason why I wanted to show you this. But let's get into it so that I can show you exactly why you don't necessarily want to do this with your molds. I'm using steel stick, which is some more putty, another thing I learned from Crafsman. Again, I'm essentially a copy at this point, to try and show you this quickly because steel putty sets up in about 30 minutes. I take a brush with this black pigment and completely coat the inside of the mold. Doing so will give you a layer of this pigment on the inside for the putty to stick to, and we're hoping that this black pigment will stick to the outside of it and give it that really matte black look. So having this matte black look is what the pigment is supposed to be used for. We're mixing it with resin in the other one, so we're probably going to get something a little glassy, but you can see there that matte black look, that is exactly what this pigment is supposed to be used for. The steel stick comes in a 2-part putty that you just cut a little bit off of and start mixing up. Now, it is some sticky stuff compared to that other putty. I like to put a little bit of pigment in there. It makes it so if I did ever mess up and have to sand it, maybe I'll see more black than I would this kind of gray putty at the end. See, the ball comes off a little bit more black than normal. I push it down so that it completely covers the inside of the mold. I'm trying to replicate the A coin from the other one. Now, there's probably a little bit too much putty here, but I'd rather have too much than too little unless I was going for a very specific thickness. So I think this will turn out okay. Before it starts curing, I put a little bit of black pigment on the backside, and now we can kind of go back to the dice while that's curing and setting up. Now the dice here look awesome. I love how black they look, but as I said before, mixing the pigment with the resin makes them turn extremely glassy, and I'll show you in a minute how we can change that, but I didn't want to test it on my molds because it will kind of ruin your molds. So snip these sprues off, and when you do, I know the first question that's going to come up is, hey, wouldn't it just be matte if you snipped the sprues off or sanded this? But you can see, no, it comes off as this kind of weird gray because the resin mixes a little bit white, so you're not going to get a perfect matte black just by sanding it. I decided not to ink these. I thought about inking them white because that would be a nice contrast, or even just a not quite as black so that you could really have a gothception with your dice, but I don't know. What do you guys think that I should ink them? Let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll go ahead and do it that way. Now, I talked about glass versus matte. If you mix resin with this, it turns glossy because the resin is naturally shiny, and that is pretty much the outermost layer. You can see here, compared to this other black, it is much darker black, but it's hard to tell. Now, if you had a matte version, by filling the molds with the powder like we did here, you would absolutely get a very nice matte dice, just like the A is on the right, but look at how much is left in the mold on the left up there. Your mold is pretty much essentially used for that kind of matte black at that point. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep these glassy and glossy, but also still show you if you wanted that matte look, you can totally make it happen. Just know that that's probably what your mold is going to be used for, is that matte black look. So I hope that this digression into doing a different type of mold rather than just dice was useful for you to learn how that matteness works. I know this was a bit of a different format than normal. I just kind of wanted to show off that pigment from Culture Hustle, as well as different ways to go about making it matte or glossy. Thank you for watching. I really hope that you did enjoy this kind of digression. Please subscribe if you might want to see some more, or check out some of my other videos, especially that one that YouTube thinks you'll like. I'll put a link to the pigment in the description down below. Thank you so much. I hope that you have a fantastic day.